Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Retirement Planning Education Podcast. I'm sure you may be wondering, who are you and where is the host, Andy Panko? Well, my name is Mike Powers, another financial planner who was recently on episode 107. I had so much fun recording with Andy that I thought it would be great to turn the tables on him and have him as a guest on his own show today in a bonus episode. So I don't think he needs any introduction, but just in case this is your first time listening, Andy Panko, welcome to your show.
I'm excited to be at my show. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks, Mike. Great idea you had here.
Wonderful, wonderful. I appreciate your willingness to actually share this and I think you've shared so much with the community about what you do, who you are, and how you work with clients, but having it in one succinct episode, I think will be really helpful for a lot of people. But before we get started, hey, Andy, want to hear a joke about pizza?
I would love to hear a joke about pizza.
Never mind. It's too cheesy.
Oh, I see what you did. I like it. Good.
All right. How about how did the hacker escape from the FBI?
I don't know how.
He ran somewhere.
Of course he did.
Well, awesome. All right. So as you would say, the episode can only get better from here. So thank you everyone for listening to our jokes. But so Andy, just to get started here, why don't you give a quick background about yourself?
I got to say I'm nervous for this, which is weird because it's odd to be on the other side of the microphone and the camera for those watching. Normally when I do these things, I send the list of questions to people ahead of time and I just show up and ask questions. I realized last night, like 10 o'clock, I was like, oh, wait a second. Like, I didn't prepare for this at all. I should probably have answers to these because it would look really bad if I didn't. And for those watching, I shaved today, which is a big deal for me. I have a shirt with a collar. It does look like a picnic blanket. It's like this red gingham check shirt, which is a little weird, but I was like, whatever, I'm going for it.
You got a fresh haircut, looks like?
Yeah, you got a haircut yesterday, correct, yeah. I even flossed last night. Like, that's how big of a deal this is. I normally only floss once every 6 months in advance of going, no, just kidding. I take really good care of my teeth. Two things I've always been serious about are taking care of my teeth and my credit. So I don't joke around when it comes to oral hygiene.
That's important things.
It really is. And it's part funny, but part true. I've told my kids since they were little, like the running joke was I'd say to them, good teeth, good credit. If you have those things, you'll go far in life.
Nice.
One of them has taken that advice. The other one could use some work on the oral hygiene, but we're whatever. I'm trying.
Nice.
All right. So background, I am the founder and owner of a retirement-focused, flat fee charging retirement planning investment management firm called Tenon Financial, based in Metuchen, New Jersey, which is near where I live. It is a purely virtual firm, meaning we do coincidentally have some clients who live nearby, but even those folks, we do business with completely virtually through Zoom, email, phone calls. We do meet up for lunch and stuff just to say hi and chat, but it's a completely virtual practice, which is interesting, but seems to be working really well. Prior to that, you didn't ask, but I think this is important for people to know. It sort of frames how and why I do things the way I do and set this business up like I did, and some of my views about the industry. So I graduated college in 2000. I went to school for finance, wanted to be an advisor, but didn't really know what it was. I just wanted to help people with money decisions. And as I was interviewing for roles that places were calling financial advisor, I really quickly figured out the common denominator it was either just selling insurance to people and having that be the solution to all of their financial needs, or it was the investment management places where it was all just like you had production quotas. You have to get a certain number of new accounts, new clients, certain amount of assets under management to charge the 1% on or whatever. And just got really turned off. I was like, this isn't, I thought this would be giving advice about money and finances. It's not. It's selling products or it's just gathering assets. So I got disenfranchised by the idea of what I thought the advisory world was and gave up on it. And stumbled into a corporate job at a large insurance company doing actuarial work. So somewhere like the analysis and pricing behind the scenes of some of the products they had. And then went back to school, got an MBA part-time while working at that insurance company, and then ultimately spent 19 years in corporate and institutional banking and risk management, for lack of a better word. So I was in and around investments and financial products and strategies and risk management my whole career, but from sort of the corporate institutional side, it wasn't direct like retail advising. And then in 2016, I think it was, what sort of reinvigorated my interest in personal financial planning was my mom was transitioning into retirement, and she had a traditional like 1 or 1.25% of asset advisor at the time, and she was trying to figure out her Social Security claiming strategy. And it's one of the more complicated ones where she's divorced from my father. She's of an age where she can still like claim off his and delay her. You can't do that anymore now, but she still could. And so I knew nothing about Social Security. I just thought it was like this forced savings account the government set up for everyone. Come to find out, it's not that. But in helping her research, her advisor sort of knew the answer, but wasn't certain. And so I helped dig into it as well. And just like in that process, the light bulb really went off. Like, wow, this Social Security decision for my mom is like one of the most impactful things she can do for her financial future and her retirement. It's not messing around with which of the 36 different mutual funds should she have in her account or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was like, what, this is it. Like, this is what I thought financial advising should be, but that's not what I found 20 years prior or 15 years prior, whatever. So that sort of reinvigorated me to take another look at the advisory world. Is it something I could do? I was also at that point sort of burnt out in the corporate life, long commute to New York from where I lived, long hours, stressful work, et cetera. I was like, I want to need a change. So I just started digging around podcasts and YouTube videos and blogs about the advisory world. And the more I dug, the more I was like, you know what? I think I can do this on my own terms, provide a service I want to provide that I think people actually need, focus on what I want to focus on, charge how I want to charge. I was always sort of fundamentally opposed to percent of asset model from having worked in and around it my whole career. I saw the good sides, I saw the bad sides, and I saw the irrational side of it. And so that was kind of it. So that was 2016-ish, and I just committed, you know what? I'm doing this. I'm doing this my own way. 2019 was the year I'd planned to leave. I gave myself a few years to learn more about the technical aspects of planning, the regulatory aspects, the running a business, like how do you run an advisory business? I knew I wanted to do it myself on my own terms, like I said, so I'd be starting a business, not just working somewhere else. And so I gave myself 3 years to figure that out, save money to go do this crazy idea of like quitting my well-paying corporate job that was very stable to start this up with true zero income and hope for the best. And so that was that. So fast forward to 2019, November 2019 was when I flipped the switch. I walked away from my old world. I started up this business from nothing, hoped for the best, and pandemic happened a few months later. I don't know how much we want to get into that, but thankfully, it all worked out, and the business did better than expected, faster than expected, and here we are, almost coming up on 5-year anniversary of the launch of the business.
Yeah, well, what a story there, Andy, and I think you're glossing over a lot of the incredible content and everything else you have provided to actually get to the success of the business too, which we can talk about maybe later at some point as well. But I'm sure that has a lot to do with all the hard work you put into that. And it sounds like your mom was also very lucky to have you alongside there with her to help her make that Social Security decision, because I think that's not uncommon from what I've seen in the financial advisory world. It still is very much focused on investments, especially with some of the larger firms. I think a lot of the smaller firms and even some of the larger firms are starting to get a lot more into the planning and the actual advice business and truly providing advice. I think I've seen, at least personally in my career, certainly a shift towards that. It used to be, if you were a fee-only firm, that pretty much was your differentiator, right? That's all you needed to do, and people would kind of flock to it. Now it's much more financial planning centric. Now it's hopefully more, you have some kind of niche or niche, however you want to say that word, whether it's retirement planning or something else. So, but congratulations to you for getting all of that. I am curious, and I know the answer to this, and I think you've even touched on it in the past, but how did you get the name Tenon Financial?
I can give you the cheesy manufactured story that sounds good on a website, or I can give you the honest. I'll give you both, I guess. So the cheesy manufactured story is that I'm big into woodworking, and I wanted to come up with a firm name that had some personal relevance to me. Tenon is a woodworking term. It's a mortise and tenon joint is a type of way to join wood together, and it's simple, it's time tested, it's sturdy, it's not unnecessarily complicated. It gets the job done well and efficiently. So the cheesy answer is, by using that, it's synonymous with retirement planning. You don't need flashy objects. You don't need this overcomplicated investment strategy. You don't need this 80-page financial plan and the latest and greatest product to get your plan. The basics, do it well, do it right. That's all you need. That's That's the corny answer. The real answer is I wanted a firm name. Well, I wanted a web address, an email address that was short and sweet. So when people type it in a web browser or type me an email, it's not like 50 characters long, like Andy at your best friend financial planning and wealthmanagement.com or something, right? Yeah. And so the limiting factor was what web domains are still available. And there's not a lot out there. If you want something that's just like 1 or 2 words, like good luck finding something. So I spent weeks kicking around hundreds of different possible names using all sorts of words and things that are traditionally associated with finances or stability or, partner, whatever. And everything was taken. So that's when I finally came around to, okay, let me dig into woodworking terms. And finally, I ended up landing on Tenon. Tenon Financial wasn't taken. I knew I didn't want to name the firm after me. I didn't want Panko Financial. I don't know why. I just didn't. So I wanted something else and whatever. I found that people don't care about the name, actually. Like, it is what it is. And you obviously need a name to register it and what have you. Nobody cares. Like, as long as you're not calling it something stupid, like I'm going to rob you financial.com, they don't care. Like, they hire you for you and the services you provide. The name is what it is. So I'm fine with Tenon Financial. There's a good story behind it I can make if people ask, but it's really just like I wanted a short web address and it doesn't really matter. People hire me for me, basically.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine when I was launching my own firm who I was struggling with the name too. And she said, and she was 3 or 4 years ahead of me, and she said, Mike, the name doesn't matter. Just pick, because picking a name, it holds up so many other decisions. She's like, just pick a name that you feel comfortable with, that it's not terrible, and move on. And she's like, you can always change it later. And I was like, oh, that's great advice. So so I love it. Sounds like you and I have very similar stories there, or experiences. So
yeah, definitely.
All right, so now we'll jump to some general retirement planning questions. In full disclosure, the following questions, these are Andy has asked them to his other guests that have come from they originated from his private Facebook group, I believe. I did not come up with them, but we're trying to keep it very standardized so that Andy's episode is very similar to other retirement planner chat episodes. So we'll keep everything very consistent. And he probably would not be happy with me if I threw him a curveball here and there for us.
I would love it. No, go for it.
Awesome. All right, Andy. So to start off, what do you think is an area of retirement planning many consumers overlook or don't give enough consideration to?
And I struggle with these because after having chatted with you and a handful of other folks, there's been a lot of common denominators and responses across these questions. So I wanted to come up with something unique and different, and I really couldn't for most or any of these questions. So some of my answers will be very similar, if not the same, to what you and other folks have said. But I think that means something to those listening. Like, these are the common things that are seen across the industry. So they must hopefully actually mean something. But I think there's 2 main things that people overlook or don't give enough attention to. First one would be sort of the softer side, non-financial aspect of things. I think a lot of people realize they need to have enough money. Figuring out how much is a different story, but they realize the financial aspects of retirement planning to some extent. But the non-financial things, like someone works for 40 years, is burnt out, and it's like, I got to get out of here. I just got to quit. This is sucking the life out of me. And they just stop cold turkey at 65, let's say. No plans for what they're going to do, how they're going to spend their time. Maybe the last 40 years, their relationship with their significant other was well cemented, and this person who's retiring was always out of the house every day. They'd be around a couple hours a night, and on weekends where they'd cut the grass and do whatever, and then the other spouse had his or her own life, and you had a routine. Now this person retires and they're home every day. That can be a real unpleasant shock to the dynamics of a relationship for those that are in a relationship. So that's one thing. Think about, are you two okay with being around each other? If not, what are you going to do with your time? For those without a significant other, as important, or just simply how are you going to fill your days? It sounds good in theory to have this life of leisure where you don't have to do the 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever your hours are. But there's a lot of hours in the day to fill. And for better or worse, a lot of people's identity and sort of reason for being is tied up in their job, in their career. That stops. It's like you can be lost. You can be floundering, not knowing what to do. Yeah, you go to the gym. Yeah, you go for a walk. You take the dog out. It's 10 a.m. Now what? Now what are you going to do? There's still a lot of day to fill. So it can lead to a sense of sort of I don't say loss, but lack of fulfillment, lack of purpose, lack of meaning, just feeling like you don't know what your role is anymore in the world. And I mean, that's kind of extreme to say it that way, but I think some people do have feelings like that.
Yeah.
And so you really need to think through, how am I going to spend my time? What's going to be my identity, my social connection? You're going to have to try now to create and maintain social connection. Whereas when you work, it just happened. You're always around people. So that, the soft side. The other one would be taxes. Now, I'm a little biased in saying this because I probably focus more on taxes than the average person or advisor, but I've come across a lot of folks where, especially if you worked for someone else, you weren't self-employed, like you didn't really think about paying taxes. You had taxes withheld from your job. When you first started that job, maybe it was decades ago, you filled out a form that would dictate how much tax was withheld, but that was it. When you retire and your wages stop, like you still have to pay taxes. And a lot of people don't realize that. Like they don't have wages where taxes are withheld from. They need to now consciously think, how am I paying taxes? If you have Social Security, yeah, you can have taxes paid from there. If you have a pension, yeah, same thing, you can withhold from there. But some people, and many people may need to figure out what's my tax going to be for the year and maybe make estimated payments. That's a real foreign concept to a lot of people. And it's not the end of the world. I mean, you know, you'll end up owing more taxes than you thought, maybe have some interest penalty on it, but it'll be like, oh man, this is something I didn't think about ahead of time. So that's, you know, have a plan for how you're going to pay your taxes.
Great. I love both of those. I actually have I was thinking back, I had a flashback when you said making sure your spouse is okay with you being home a lot more. Because I remember I had a couple I was working with years ago, and let's call them Sally and Sam. So Sam retired. Sally had been a homemaker for many years, and Sam comes and they both come into the office, and we're asking Sam, you know, how's retirement? And Sally says, everybody asks how Sam likes retirement. Nobody asks me. She's like, this is terrible. She's just like, he's at home all day. He's bored. He's like driving me crazy. Like, I like having my own space, everything else. So it really is, it can be a big adjustment for both people, you know, for better or for worse. So I think that is really important to have a solid understanding on that, on top of the financial piece. I think that softer side can also be very overlooked. So I think that's a great answer. So
yeah, and not to be too much of a Debbie Downer, but the term gray divorce, for those who haven't heard of it, is just simply the concept of people divorcing later in life, like 50 plus or 60 plus. I don't know what the age cutoff is. And a large driver behind that is this phenomenon we're talking about. Spouses partners do their thing throughout their decades of life. You got your routine, work stops, you're around each other, and either you're different people because you weren't the same people you already, met 40 years ago, before kids, before you had the monotony of life and responsibilities. You had different sort of routines and hobbies you've each had along your years. Now you're thrown in this thing together, and it's like, oh wow, like we got to re-find each other, or we're different than we thought we were. And you just, I don't know, sometimes it just simply doesn't work out, right? And I'm not saying it's good or bad. Financially, obviously, it's not the best thing, but it's a thing, and you got to beware of that and plan for it and try to help manage and get ahead of that as much as possible to avoid some of these surprise sort of conflicts and life changes, and always being around each other every day type thing that we talked about, because they could be bad on a relationship.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that can actually derail a solid retirement plan too, because maintaining two households can obviously be a lot more expensive than maintaining one. So
now, the flip side, I don't want to probably taking too much time on this, but like I know of people who have divorced at 40, 50, whatever, sort of refound themselves, sort of had life 2.0, and were very much happy that they did. They don't regret having been with the first partner, but for whatever circumstances that they were, it just ended up that stage of life for both of them. It was decided it was better to do something different. And yeah, financially it's a ding, obviously, but there are people that are glad they did it, and their life is more fulfilled because of it. So I'm not saying divorce, everyone should shoot for divorce, but there could be a silver lining from it, and there are positive outcomes, at least anecdotally from folks I've heard. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
I'm not sure if
I find a bright side to everything. I don't know.
well, and my wife will probably not listen to this episode, but just in case she does, I'm also not advocating divorce here. So everyone's situation is unique. So, all right. On the flip side of that, what do you think is an area of retirement planning many consumers give too much attention or consideration to?
The obvious one as an advisor is too much focus on investments and returns and having to come up with like the perfect portfolio of this security versus that security and listening and watching CNBC to get the latest and greatest. And most of that is noise. And we'll talk about this when we talk about like investment approach, and I get why people are hung up on it. It's so in your face. It's so sort of glamorous, for lack of a better word, to talk about and think about and have conversations about investments. But there's a few basic steps most people could do for investing, and that's it. It really is kind of cruise control. So focusing too much on investments and what the return is, and you're comparing your returns to your neighbors, or that's some other portfolio or something you saw on CNBC, don't do that. Another one is focusing or thinking too much that there's going to be perfection and this ultra precise plan and sort of this known definable, like, yep, my plan is rock solid because this software says so or whatever. There's never going to be 100% bulletproof plan. Like, obviously, yes, there's big stones you want to get right, and there's things you can do to try to optimize. But there's some folks who get hung up, and often it's like the engineer folks, which I get why they view things this way, but they want, things solved and defined to the nth degree. And when it comes to planning for something like your next 40, 50 years of life, there's so many big unknown variables. We can't attempt to pretend we know how they're going to pan out. We can just make sort of educated guesses, but you have to kind of roll with that. So people thinking they have a plan, like, yep, I'm good. This says I can retire. Everything's perfect. Nothing's going to change. Don't focus on that. It's not going to happen. Focus for good. Focus for good enough, for lack of a better word, but there will never be perfection in a retirement plan.
Yeah, perfect. Love that. We're always going to be wrong. It's just which direction are we wrong in, right?
Correct. You want to try to minimize the chances of being wrong, but you have to realize you will be wrong. Things will change. You have to adapt along the way.
Yeah, no, that's great. All right. What are some major differences in retirement planning for single people versus couples?
There's a handful. One actually that I knew about, but didn't give as much weight and heft until Victor Medina, who was a planner who was on the show recently.
Yeah, great episode.
Said the biggest one in his mind was long-term care and planning around that. So with a couple, generally speaking, when the first of the couple, or the first one to have a long-term care event or need prolonged help or assistance, it's usually the other partner is the one who will do it. So financially, it may not be a big ding because they're using their time, their sort of human capital to provide it. But then when one spouse or partner passes, the one who's remaining it's on them. And then it's probably going to be financial capital and capacity that'll ultimately pay for care because there's not another partner there to be the one to provide the care for them. So with a couple, there's that angle where the sort of first line of defense when long-term care happens is the other partner will probably do the bulk of the role to provide the care. Once you're single, or if you were single from the get-go, then it's a different story. Then it's purely on you, and having the finances to cover long-term care is much more the first line of defense. So there's that. The other obvious one is taxes. Me, again, coming at things from a tax angle. The tax system isn't fair. There's some areas where it's beneficial to others and then detrimental to others. So just as an example, and anyone who's single, I'm sure knows what I'm talking about. If you make $200,000 of income and you're single, you're going to be taxed at X percent, let's say, whatever. If you make that same $200,000, but you're now married and your partner doesn't have any income, that same $200,000 is taxed substantially less because you fall under married tax brackets and stuff. And that's not fair. Now, there's a reason for it, I think. Historically, it'd be that when there was a married couple, one spouse was assumed to be home. This is going back, 60, 70 years ago, whatever. And so having just one income meant you had more mouths to feed, more people to support. So they gave you more of a tax break, which I believe is the reason behind that. But still, that's not entirely fair from when you look at it. So there's different tax angles to planning for someone single versus married, or even transitioning from married to single. There's some opportunities you can do, like in the year of death, which sounds morbid, but the year of death, you can still use married tax brackets, even though there's now only one person surviving. And then the other one, it's a pro and a con, is that when there's a couple, there's a partnership, there's two people who chime in on financial decisions. Now, sometimes one person doesn't care; they take a complete backseat voluntarily. But oftentimes there'll be two people who kind of chime in on making decisions about things. Now, it could be good because it's sort of a sounding board, and there's two people to kind of vote on decisions, or it could be bad. Like I've seen some scenarios where it's created some conflict. Like spouse A wants to do this with their money or their plan. Spouse B is like, I'm not really okay with that. I think we should do this instead. So then they can have some conflict they have to try to resolve, and it can make the planning and decision making a little clunky. So could be pro, could be a con, but nonetheless, it is a difference because there's a second voice that has to be taken into account when there's a couple.
Yeah, great points. Absolutely. I like all that. All right. Do you think some, many, / all people could do their own retirement planning? And this is probably very unique for you because a lot of people in your community, I would guess, are more of the DIY type investors and even DIY planners. So I think you get a lot of exposure and questions around this.
Yeah, I'm somewhat biased because of that, because my exposure to folks is often that, whether it's a Facebook group or people listen to podcasts or whatever, they're pretty well informed. They're really good DIYers. And I think the vast majority of the folks who follow anyone listening right now very well probably can do their own retirement planning. And I would never push on them, hey, you need to hire an advisor. So there's definitely lots and lots of people who can, arguably even should, do their own retirement planning. But even for those folks, there may come a time where either they can't because they lose sort of the mental capacity or acuity to be sharp about this stuff, or they simply don't want to. They're in retirement, and not to say it's a full-time job necessarily, but they don't want to have to be the one always worrying about what are my tax projections this year, how am I going to, or when do I rebalance my investments, which accounts do I take money out of this month. So you may hit a point, even if you are the sharpest cat out there who knows all this stuff well, you just don't want to do it anymore. So this is my way of saying I'm never trying to push advisory services on people. I 100% believe and know that a large chunk of people can very well do their own planning, but there may come a point where they can't or they no longer want to, in which case then having an advisor can make sense.
Yeah, and I've even seen a lot of people where maybe the perfect relationship might even be, you've talked about advice only on your firm, on your podcast before too. So an advice only is someone that just provides financial advice and not actually an investment management component. Right. I even see potentially situations where getting a one-time plan and periodically updating that every year or 2 or 3 years, whatever it is, can be very beneficial to a lot of people too, who otherwise are DIY, but just want that second opinion sanity check before they do stuff. So I like everything you said there.
I think that's a great point. And advisors aren't all or none, where it's like you don't work with someone at all, or you work with someone who's managing your investments in this ongoing evergreen relationship. Like that's how I choose to run my business, the latter, that ongoing thing. But a lot of people don't need that. Like a lot of people will be very well served by a few hours of time or just a one-time plan and be on their way for the next 5 years or whatever. Yeah. And thankfully, there's increasingly more advisors that do offer what I'll call limited engagement services, like hourly or one-time plans or whatever, because that is a thing people need. So again, different strokes for different folks. I choose to not offer that because I like what I do and how I do it, but I 100% see a big need for the advice-only kind of limited engagement thing, which there are plenty of people who offer that, thankfully.
Yeah, I think our mutual friend Cody Garrett, who's also a moderator of the Facebook group that you run, Andy, I think he actually launched his firm 3.5 years ago with a wait list. So that's the kind of demand there is out there for that, for someone that's competent that does advice only. So
100%.
It's pretty huge. All right. What questions should people ask? What things should they look for, etc., when trying to find a retirement planner / financial advisor?
You're going to love this. And I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but this is part cop-out and part I really think this is the best answer, is I'm going to refer to the blog you wrote in December 2022, which is on your website. I'll share a link to it because it's that good. 9 questions to ask a flat fee or any financial advisor as you near retirement. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's nothing I can think to add of what you should look for, ask, etc. So I would just recap it here, but for those interested in reading it, and I highly recommend you do, there will be a link to this in the notes to the show. So what Mike said, 9 things you should ask. How many clients do you work with? You don't want an advisor that has 300 clients. There's no way he or she can properly serve you. If they do that, all they're doing is just sort of like overseeing your investments and doing a quick check-in once a year. There's not any meaningful planning going on when you have hundreds of clients, like is commonly the case at the real big household name firms. 2, what happens if you get hit by the proverbial bus? Or the actual bus, for that matter, who knows? Great to know, especially a lot of the firms who are advice only, who are truly comprehensive planning firms, not just like asset gatherers. They're going to be smaller places, like Mike's firm, like my firm, like other firms like us, because these firms didn't exist. And we decided the only way to really do it is to start it ourselves, which is why it's not coincidence that most firms doing really good, really thorough planning focused places are relatively new, relatively small, et cetera. Now, over time, there's going to be more people who are more established in their businesses. So, as this sort of planning focusing continues to grow, you'll find larger, more established firms doing it. But for now, they are relatively small. So you do want to know, if it's a one-person shop, what happens if that one person gets hit by the proverbial or real bus? So you want to make sure your assets are taken care of, and or what happens to your relationship. 3, do you have your own financial planner? We have mixed opinions on this, and I respect that. I don't have my own financial planner. I don't feel I need one. I think I know enough to know what I'm missing, what I'm not, but I know other advisors steadfastly believe they need their own planners, and I respect that. So if people want to hold that against me, so be it. But no, I do not have my own financial planner, in case you're interested. But it is a great question to ask.
Well, and to clarify that, so one of the reasons I put it on there, and it related to an own life experience that I had, where I actually had a sibling passed away unexpectedly, and so that very much brought into aspect my own mortality and everything else. And I immediately thought through, my wife has no idea where like this and this are. So how can we bring it, kind of force us to bring together and make sure that she is very well cared for if something ever happens, because she has no desire to learn the financial planning aspect. She still gets updated about once per year kind of on where we stand, everything else, and I kind of keep her updated on that. But that way someone truly knows what we're trying to achieve, and if something happens to me, she can literally just pick up the phone and call that advisor. And so that's why personally I make that decision. I would completely agree, though, it's not necessarily a necessity, but it also has helped me to further justify my answer. It also has helped me kind of sit on the other side of the table. I think I've actually learned even more about myself and the planning relationship by also being a client. So that's why I put the question in there.
No, and those are great points, and I don't disagree with that. Especially like you said, your wife who isn't. You now have a third party you can help oversee, or knows the lay of the land type thing. So that's a great point. 4, what's your investment philosophy? We won't harp too much on this, but there's infinite ways to skin this cat of how a portfolio should be invested. If you, the client, have a really firm feeling around one of these ways and the advisor is very different, like you two aren't going to be a good fit for one another. 5, what fees will I incur working with you? There's lots of potential ways in which clients will pay fees directly or indirectly. And just simply ask the question very bluntly, like, tell me every possible fee or expense I'm going to have in working with you, either directly fees from you or fees from the custodian, fees from products, whatever. 6, do you allow clients to manage their own portfolios? This is a good one. Some clients want a little bit of their own discretion, whether it's partial discretion or fully, like the client's going to do all their own trading, rebalancing, whatever. And so they just want an advisor to help give them the guidance and then pass off the instructions to them to execute the trades and stuff like that. So the same thing, like this could be a horrendous fit of relationship if you're not synced up with who's doing what when it comes to the actual management of investments.
Yeah.
7, what credentials do you have? Important. Obviously anyone in the business, unless they're an outright fraudster, needs to be regulatorily licensed for the business they're in, but that is like no symbol or badge of like knowledge or experience. Basically, it's a frighteningly low hurdle to get licensed to manage investments or sell securities or sell insurance.
Yep.
And so there's voluntary designations like CFP, for better or worse, is probably the best known and closest thing there is to a standard for broader financial planning. And there's other ones around investments, around taxes, et cetera. 8, are you a fiduciary at all times? Are you legally required to always act in my best interest? Is a good way to phrase that. Always required to act in my best interest. There are some advisors, based on the business they're in, the regulations that they're under, they're only required to act in your best interest at certain times, like when they're giving you advice about investments, but then they can sort of switch hats and sell you a product where they're not required to act in your best interest. That's slowly changing. There's like different, I'm not fully up to speed on all of it, but there's different regulations where even under those sales transaction-based relationships, there can be a fiduciary-like requirement bestowed upon them. Now, the reason why I don't pay attention is because in the business you and I are in, Mike, like our regulations require us to act in clients' best interest at all times. So it's not even a question. Other firms are slightly different. And finally, point 9 was, do you work with clients like me? I mean, you and I know this, but it's really important for advisors to have some sort of area of specialization or thing they're really good at, comparatively more so than other advisors, and then focus on that. It makes them more efficient and makes them better if they're seeing and doing the same things all the time. You as a client don't want to be like the oddball outlier where, 90% of Mike's clients do this and Mike knows that really well. And here I am with this weird business Mike knows nothing about. How's Mike going to give me the best advice? Like, Mike's not, right? So you and I have the ability and discretion and leisure to pick and choose clients who are right fits. Other firms, like going back to my experience in college, it's if you can fog a mirror, you're a good client, and you have to hit production targets. So you're just desperate to get any relationship you can, even if it means you're not going to be able to properly serve this person. That's not a good way to go about it. So thank you for that list, Mike. I think you did a phenomenal job in summing up questions and things people should look for. So my cop-out answer is your article is what people should look at.
Well, thank you, Andy. That was completely unexpected. Very, very appreciate it. And it's interesting as I kind of reflect and hearing you actually go through those various questions that I had written a couple of years ago. One thing that I would actually add to that as I think about this as well is, I think the value of a good advisor is also in the questions that they ask you, the client. And so, the best way I can think that through is, when you're actually going through the process of interviewing various advisors, are they asking you thoughtful, open-ended questions, or just focusing on the numbers? It doesn't mean just focusing on the numbers is a bad thing, but that may be indicative of how the overall relationship will be, as opposed to potentially truly having empathy for you as a person and really trying to get at the, kind of the quote unquote meat of the discussion and what you're really there for. So,
right. That's a good
all
point.
right. Can the value, I know you've talked a lot about this in the past, so we could probably have another whole episode on this, but for a summary anyway, can the value provided by a planner or advisor actually be measured?
Let me explain to people where this question came from. I think this is important. There's a well-known advisor who's well-known within the advisory community, who charges a lot, who charges percent of assets and says a monstrous amount of value is delivered from the service, and so the fee is justified. And I've pushed back in public on this and said, no, you can't. You can quantify the fee you pay. If you're paying $30,000 a year, you know what you're paying. Can you quantify what you're actually getting out of it? And my point is no. You can't. Some things can be, but the majority of advisory services, you can't pin a definitive, indisputable number of value on. I'm not saying value is not there. I think there's tremendous value to be had in advisory relationships. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this business. But I think it's disingenuous to say, yes, I am providing you more than $30,000 of value a year. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be a client, because why would you pay for more than what you're getting? And I'm saying, no, you can't define, you can't say, indisputably, there's $30,000 of value. So without getting too much into it, I did write an article about this a few years ago. I'm going to link to that. That gives a few examples of why, no, like you can't. Stop fooling yourself. So I don't know how much further to go with that. So, I mean, I'm of the view, like, I can't quantify the value of doing Roth conversions. I can come up with an estimate, an educated guess estimate of how much tax it might save you over the next 40 years, but it will be wrong. There's so many things that can and will change that I can't honestly say, even though my software will try to do it, I can't defend, I'm going to save you $247,000.
Yeah.
I could be off by hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending how the world unfolds. So stuff like that, you can't, you can attempt to put a number on it, but you can't truly and honestly, indisputably put value on that. Even things like saving fees, I take issue with. So for example, someone was at another advisor where they stuffed their portfolios with unnecessarily expensive mutual funds that all had a 1% expense ratio, let's say. I come in and be like, oh, low-hanging fruit, swap those out, put you into low-cost index funds at 0.05% per year. I just saved you 0.95% per year. Obvious, like you can't dispute that, right? So look at that. I just, if I'm charging percent of assets, 0.95% of my fee is already paid for from these fund expenses I saved you. And I'm like, true to some extent, but how long are you going to try to take ownership of that? Like, what's to say this person wouldn't have 2 months from now read an article about index funds and took it upon themselves to swap out into lower cost funds? So you can't in perpetuity claim that you're the one responsible for this value, hence you're therefore always justifying 0.95% of your fee every year. Like, that's just baloney. So I get heated up about this, and that's why I put this question on here. This wasn't crowdsourced from other folks. This was like me wanting to know what other advisors think. So it's kind of just like a personal pet peeve that this is here. But anyway, that's my views on it, and refer to the article I'll link. You'll get some really clean examples of why you can't actually pin a number on the value of what most of what advisors do. Again, there's value to be had, but a lot of it's subjective as well. Like the peace of mind and ability to sleep well at night, you can't put a number on that. Some people may value that a lot, others may not care, and then everything in between. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yep. No, I think well said. Well said. Nothing to add there. So, all right. What are your go-to retirement planning content sources, blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, etc.? Now, I know you put out a lot of content, as I've already alluded to, and I'm sure obviously anyone listening has probably already seen some of these, but outside of that, where are you getting your content from?
Yeah, so me as a practitioner focusing on the intersection of tax planning and retirement planning, there's a handful of sources I go. Now, like Victor said, and I think I like the way he framed it, like he's learned most of what he needs to learn about the technical nitty-gritty of doing financial and tax planning. So for him, it's really just updating when things change, like staying fresh on tax changes and stuff. And I think I'm largely in the same boat. With that said, there's a few places that are the best spots for tax planning as it relates to retirement. One is anything from the Ed Slott group. And he actually has a paid membership group I just joined last month. It's $8,000 a year. There's 2 in-person seminars you go to where super thorough information. He and his group are the best at staying current and on top of and synthesizing and explaining anytime there's new tax legislation out, anytime there's changes to IRAs, Roth IRAs, whatever. His group's all over it. So I'm now a member of that. I followed his stuff for a long time. I finally bit the bullet and joined his actual paid group. So that's one. Anything from Jeff Levine. He used to work for the Ed Slott group. He sort of spun out and became his own celebrity now. Similar thing. He's all over tax legislation and changes and good at updating it and summarizing it to the world. Michael Kitsis, another one. He's all over the map with what he covers, but he does also do a lot of good tax stuff. Now, he kind of farms out at this point. He has people write for him, under his company name, but that's really good stuff. Bob Keebler, he's another tax-focused guy who does a lot of updates and content about tax stuff. Natalie Choate, she has a book. It's called, I forget, Life and Death Planning for Retirement. It's basically the Bible, and I don't mean this like sacrilegious, so I probably shouldn't say that, but it's as comprehensive as you can get of a summary of the tax code as it relates to tax matters around IRAs, Roth IRAs, pension plans, whatever. So I have that book. It's a phenomenal reference. So those are my sort of technical meat and potatoes tax stuff. Bigger picture things, I subscribe to Investment News, which is an advisor-focused online publication. It's usually fresh on all sorts of happenings in the advisory industry, not just tax stuff, but other stuff. So I stay frequent on that. I subscribe to Wall Street Journal, which isn't planning specific, but that's probably the best lay of the land of general business environment and investment environment, for news. When I was getting into this thing, like I said before, researching the advisory world in 2016 onward, there was a handful of really good podcasts I listened to. I kind of stopped listening to podcasts, unfortunately, but I used to soak them up routinely. One was the Retirement Answer Man from Roger Whitney. A lot of good financial stuff, but as important, he really hits hard in a good way onto the non-financial things like I talked about. The Retirement and IRA show, super technical, phenomenal education. They should be charging for it. It's that good, but they don't. That's another great one. Benjamin Brandt's Retirement Starts Today Radio. That's another good one. Victor Medina used to be called Make It Last. Now it's called Retirees, I think it is. Retirees Radio. And then finally, YouTube. Rob Berger, one of my favorite YouTube channels. For anyone listening, probably already know of Rob. He's a great Vanguardian, straight shooter, breaks things down cleanly. He's not in the business. He was a lawyer, I think. Now he's just like this advocate for personal finance. Fantastic content, really easy to understand, really pragmatic and logical. I think if people don't already follow him, they should. And that's that.
Yeah, what a great list of resources, and I'm sure you'll link to all those in the show notes as well too, if anyone wants to refer back to them. But I would second all of those resources, and especially Rob Berger, or Berger, I can't remember how you pronounce it, but Rob does do a phenomenal job on very, very good, in-depth, complex issues in plain English, I think, on his YouTube channel. So
yeah, a lot of good visuals too. He's really good with like the screen shares and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he clearly is doing this for fun. So it's neat to see him do that. All right, now let's switch more to kind of practice-specific questions that are more related to you and your firm. So how do you know if someone is a good fit for you as opposed to just being a good fit for them?
Sort of overarching, they need to be cool people that I'm going to enjoy talking to. Now, I'm not saying I need all these people to be my friends, nor do I want them to feel like I'm their friend, but I want to not cringe at when I talk to them. And when I see an email from them or a call from them, I don't want to be like, oh, this person again. And it's hard to tease that out, but you can kind of know from the initial calls and the tone and what they say and how they say it. So they got to be just like genuinely good people. I don't, as everyone listening knows, like I don't take myself too seriously. I take what I do very seriously, and I know I'm good at it, but I think a lot of people in this business think way too highly of themselves and need to relax a little bit. So I basically am saying like I want and need personalities who are okay with that and are sort of the same themselves. They take what they do seriously, but don't take themselves too seriously. And then willing to delegate. This sort of goes back to like one of the questions you had in your blog about things to ask. Like I am not open at all to working with someone where they want to manage all their investments, they want to have all the say, and I'm just a sounding board. Now, not because I'm trying to hide anything, it's far from it. It's just, it's not a type of relationship I want to be in. Now, there are some advisors who will do that. It's not what I choose to do. So someone has to be okay with, there is a very large element of trust here. And I know it's hard for people to get comfortable with trusting a stranger, especially some random guy in New Jersey who's wearing like a picnic blanket as a shirt right now, who you may have never met in person before. But hopefully through all the content I put out there, like you can get a sense of who I am, what the business is, what we do, that you can hopefully trust us, what have you. So someone has to be willing to delegate. I'll leave it there. There's other sort of things I can pick on. Obviously, like their financial situation needs to be a match for what we do. Like, you and I, Mike, we don't deal with people who are these extraordinary areas of complexity that we're not specialists in. I will quickly pass on that and say, I'm not the best person to serve you. So that's about it.
Perfect. And I think, I'm guessing too, the clients have to have sufficient assets to where the fees that you're charging also in your mind have to be valuable as well too, right? So
yeah, that's a great point. Right. So charging a flat fee, as you know, it's a slamming deal for some people. Like it's really comparatively, I don't want to say cheap, but low cost for some people. It's really expensive for others. So someone who has $200,000 in their nest egg, there's no way they should be paying someone like you or I $10,000 a year or whatever it is. No matter how valuable it is, like I can't in good faith do that. When the alternative is they can go to a traditional 1.5% of asset advisor and pay $2,000-$3,000 a year. Now, to be fair, I'm confident in saying our service is better, most likely better than what the other advisor is doing. But there's still sort of this like comparing what what my firm charges compared to what they can pay elsewhere. I just can't justify that unless they have some really crazy, like outside of their assets, some really crazy scenario that can really use some good planning, that sure, I can just like charge them out of pocket, not charge them out of their assets. That's a different story. But if that is the case, like that's probably more complexity that I'm interested in dealing with. So yeah, the assets have to fit. There's no formal minimum asset size that my firm has, but do the math. If we're charging roughly $10,000 a year and you have $500,000 of investable assets that we're going to manage, that's like 2% of assets per year. That's higher than I'm comfortable charging people. So there is sort of informally an asset minimum of $1 million-ish, let's say, of investable assets, and then up from there.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So
yeah,
thanks for explaining it.
Sure.
All right, I know the answer to this and probably a lot of other questions, but have you ever had to fire, quote unquote, fire a client, and why?
Yes, 4. And fire's a bad word. I don't know why I chose the word fire. That was my word, not yours. So I'm just, so people wonder, like, why is Mike being such a jerk?
Transition, let's call it, maybe. So
yeah, transition. So 4 times. And in all 4 cases, they were absolutely lovely people. It had nothing to do with, like, the personality fit was there. One was just simply, I got uncomfortable. The person's plan was too contingent on real estate, both primary real estate and rental properties, that a large portion of the potential success of their plan was hinged on these real estate transactions or rental incomes panning out as expected. And I didn't question that this could happen. I just personally wasn't comfortable with it. It's not my wheelhouse. I'm a sort of traditional investable assets, throw in some annuities, throw in some pensions, throw in Social Security. When there's more than a primary property, maybe one rental property, I start to feel like I don't know. It's my problem, not theirs. I'm the first to admit that. I just couldn't get comfortable with it. So that was a client, absolutely lovely people. Worked together for a couple years maybe, and then just like the plan got more focused on real estate than and I knew it going into it. So partly it's my fault for taking them on in the first place. But I know I didn't, and I don't think they regret our time together. And what I did was, like, transition, like you said, found another advisor who's really sharp that I trust, that I would refer my own parents to, that I know was competent to do this and was excited to work with this planning scenario. So I haven't really kept in touch about the relationship after the fact to see how it went, but I have no reason to think this wasn't a smooth transition where the people are happy and better served by this new person than I was serving them. So that was one. The other 3 were all similar situations, just very, very going back to, like, they wanted precision and things solved and projected to the nth degree. I just hit a point where it's like, I'm not comfortable trying to pretend like I can give you more clarity and certainty around these projections. I always come back to, like, this is the best case estimate. Like, I'm confident in saying we're on the right path and directionally we're going in the right way. But I can't promise, nor can this software, that you will have exactly X dollars left when you're 85 years old. And I just got the feeling these people wanted more and more of that really finite, defined deliverable of show me all these detailed reports going out 90 year, whatever. Yeah. And I just I'm not comfortable doing this. So same thing, kind of parted ways. It wasn't on bad terms. Who knows? Maybe they were sour at me. I don't know. But, like, I wasn't sour at them. I tried my best to find them other folks and refer them to other people I think were better suited. But that was that. Thankfully, I have not yet come across someone where it's like this person's just a jerk and they're a horrible person and, like, they got to go. Hasn't happened yet, thankfully.
And hopefully, if they were, that would come up in that initial meeting, right? And that initial calls that you have with them. So
yeah, and one thing, like Victor said, not to keep going back to Victor, but he had a great case of this. He had a client where, to Victor, the person was lovely, right? Very nice and whatever, but to Victor's support, to his team, was just apparently, like, just real rude and brazen. Like, there's no place for that. So maybe in the initial call, the person was very, all rosy and happy and nice, and then true colors came out. But yeah, usually I think you can spot in your initial relationship and kind of due diligence of each other whether or not this person's a good personality fit for you or not. But sometimes stuff slips through the cracks.
Yeah, I love that he said that, and that he's prioritizing his team over just revenue, because I think that's so important, having a team. You and I have very small practices, but the bigger your team grows,
right?
It's really important that you have other people who are very happy being there. They want to do the work. They like, and they enjoy working with your clients, because otherwise they're not going to try their hardest probably either for those people either. So that's what you really want. So I'm so glad it was really neat to hear him say that in your podcast with him.
Yeah, same with me. I have a teammate, Michelle, who's a second advisor, and if anyone were to ever say anything, underhanded or rude or disparaging or whatever, like absolute zero tolerance policy. I don't care how much you're paying. I don't care how much otherwise good clients. Like there's no flexibility on that, and I will quickly kick them out, and I will fire them in that sense. They won't be transitioned; they will be fired in that case.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a joke there, but it's probably not appropriate. So I'll move on to the next question.
This is probably a smart move.
Yep. What's your view and approach on investment management?
Could spend a whole episode on this. I'll try not to do that, but passive, Vanguardian, I invest this way personally and professionally. I think all most people need is a few basic low-cost index funds, obviously in allocations that are right for you and your circumstances and risk tolerance and whatever. Especially on the stock side of things. I won't name specific securities. The show is not investment advice. Do not misconstrue it as that. But I think all most people need for stock exposure is anywhere from 1 to 3, 5 if you want to be really fancy. Basic, whether it's index funds or funds with like a slight tilt towards value, whatever you choose to do. On the fixed income side, that's open for discussion, and I think that changes. Whereas my views on stock investing won't much if ever change. My views on fixed income portion will have to change as macroeconomics change. So I think we chatted about this when you were on. When interest rates were zero a few years ago, there wasn't a lot of options out there for what you do with like the bond portion of your portfolio. Do you park it in cash or do you use individual bonds or whatever? Now that interest rates are 4+%, depending what maturity bond you're looking at, there is some meat on the bone of more traditional, like holding individual bonds or whatever. Even cash, high yield savings accounts, CDs, short-term treasury bills, they're not now, but they were, well, some still are, paying over 5%. Like that's pretty good. So my approach around the fixed income portion of the portfolio has changed some and probably will change again as macroeconomic variables change. But it's still largely a index fund thing. Recently, we have started doing more individual bonds, again, because when treasury bills are getting 5+%, it's hard not to use those, at least to some extent. But we still also use total bond market fund. We haven't dumped that, far from it. That's definitely in the mix. I don't know, I guess leave there unless you had other things you wanted to pick into.
Well, it might be helpful a little bit, I think, just to dig in, at least for a minute or two. How are you kind of picking the individual bonds? And again, we're not giving specific investment advice, but that might, I think, be helpful as especially a lot of your DIY investing clients, or not clients, listeners and people who, kind of read a lot of your content. It might actually give them a little bit of perspective too on what are you thinking there when you actually do choose individual bonds over like a total bond market index fund.
This is a tough one. So when interest rates were really low a few years ago, I would just use a total bond market fund. And in addition to clients' cash they had in banks, like I always advocate for an emergency fund or having a certain amount of cash on hand, depending what your circumstances are. That wouldn't be under management with me per se. That would have been at their bank or their savings account. So I would just manage the actual sort of fixed income, the bond portion of it, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But then interest rates rose. So it's the reason why I used a total bond market fund a few years ago was that like treasury bills were paying 0.05%. It's like, what's the point? Just keep it in your bank. Like literally 0.05%. Even like 5-year, 10-year bonds were paying 1%, maybe on, 10-year bond was slightly higher, 5-year bond was lower. It's like, I don't know, what's the point? Again, you're not really making much of a difference. Just keep it in cash. And then interest rates rose a lot. And what that meant, not to get too specific, is that the price of the total bond market fund dropped. It dropped 13% in 2022 as interest rates shot up. So people are like, what the heck? I thought bonds were supposed to be safe. And that's when I explained duration and whatever. And so now, my thought process now is the pain was already realized with the total bond market fund. Unless you think rates are going to continue to go up more from here, now is actually a much better time to own the total bond market fund than it was 3 years ago when interest rates were near zero, because there is now room for interest rates to go back down if and when that happens, in which case the bond fund price will go back up. And there's interest getting thrown off along the way. Like total bond market fund is paying, I want to say, roughly 3% interest. per year now on an ongoing basis. And that's been ticking up slightly as interest rates have risen. So that's still sort of the core of the fixed income exposure is a total bond market fund. Now, some clients aren't okay with that. And I know there have been some prospective clients who've asked me this, my approach towards bonds, and they didn't hire me because that was my view. They want more of like the regimented, structured bucket approach, where you have the first, let's say, 7 years of cash needs cleanly ticked and tied, where you have one bond maturing in 1 year, so you know exactly what you're getting in 1 year. You have another bond maturing in 2 years, so you know exactly what you're getting, et cetera, et cetera. Do that for 7 years. I don't subscribe to that. I agree and know and understand the concept of bucketing and how it could be a sequence of return buffer, meaning if the stock market's down and doing crazy things next year, you don't want to have to sell off stocks. You want to have like readily available, fairly safe things you can pull from to get your cash needs. So if you do this bucket for 5 years, 7 years, whatever, the theory is that even over a prolonged 5 to 7 year stock market drawback, so what? You know exactly how much you're going to get from these bonds maturing in years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't take it that far. My view is a well-invested, typical sort of part bond fund, part stock fund portfolio, there's always going to be something that's up more or down less compared to something else. So there's always kind of something more optimal to pull for, or something less unoptimal. I shouldn't use double negatives. There's always something comparatively that's doing better than something else that you can pull from. Now, I do think having at least 1 year, maybe up to 3 years of cash makes sense, but formally bucketing it and structuring it, I don't do that. I think if, I can't prove this obviously, but if you fast forward, I think a total bond market fund, given it does have fluctuations up and down along the way, I think it's still likely to pan out overall the same as if you did this bucketing thing with a really regimented bucket. I can't prove it. That's just my philosophy and view, and people need to subscribe to it if they want to work with me. So anyway, the total bond market fund is the core of the fixed income holding. But like I started saying before, since short-term interest rates have shot up so much in the last few years, when you can get, it was like 5.5% at one point for a 6-month and 1 year treasury bill, it's hard to say no to that. So I would swap out some of the bond market, the bond fund exposure for some individual treasury bills, because if you can get a guaranteed 5% for 6 months or a year, I'm going to do it. So the upside was, you know, you're getting at least 5% on this money for a while. The downside was, by getting out of the bond fund, if and when interest rates do start to rise, you're missing out on the price appreciation you'll get in the bond fund. So I viewed it as a hedge. Keep some bond fund, because when rates start to decline, you'll be happy you had it, but also buy some of these individual treasury bills for 6 months, 1 year, because if you can get a guaranteed 5+%, that's hard to say no to. So it was basically a mix of the two. Now, as short-term interest rates are trending down, and treasury bills are paying, depending on maturity, you know, high 4%, maybe low 5%. I still have that same view, but less conviction in it, because, you know, there's not as much juice in these treasury bills anymore. So I don't know, leave it there, I guess, but that's my thoughts on fixed income.
No, yeah, that's a great answer. So thanks so much for adding some clarity. And the reason I feel like it's important to kind of drill down on that is because, especially for people who manage their own investments, there's been a lot of talk I've seen for should I dump the total bond market fund? And I think a lot of people don't necessarily have a good enough understanding on the pros and cons of that. And I think you did a great job of kind of articulating that. I mean, as anyone knows, Andy and I have no idea what interest rates are going to do in the future either, right? Certainly there are macroeconomic, factors and everything else that come into play, but it's almost just as hard as predicting the stock market performance. So either one of us could be just as wrong on our own intuitions on that too. But I think it's helpful to understand that the trade-offs that you take between those two strategies. So thank you.
And I just want to say that, like, bond exposure, or at least total bond market fund, isn't meant to make you gobs of money. Don't expect you're going to get 10% return, or even like 6 or 7% annualized returns from this on average going forward. It's there to throw off some interest. It's there to be compared to the craziness of what your stock portfolio can and will do at times. It's there to be like the relatively more safe, sort of the ballast of stability, comparative stability at least, so that when stocks are really crashing down, bonds shouldn't go down as much, or they should even go up. Now, 2022 was a rare exception where everything went down. Stocks still went down more than bonds, for what it's worth, but bonds went down a lot. Historically speaking, though, total bond market fund will provide some sort of counterbalance. Maybe it doesn't exactly offset what stocks do, but it at least helps mute the volatile impacts of what stocks do. So that's really what it's there for, in my view. Again, people need to subscribe to that. Different advisors will have different thoughts and feelings about bonds, bond funds, what they should or shouldn't do. And so you need to buy into that person's philosophy, or otherwise they're not going to be a good fit for you.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Well, so going along with investment management, do you do any sort of formal benchmarking of your portfolio returns, and why or why not?
No. Next question. No, I don't. And this is something else. I know different people have different views, and I respect them. But knowing we invest in index funds, your returns will be the returns of these respective markets or indices. But like, for example, people will commonly say the S&P 500 was up 20% last year or whatever. Why was my portfolio only up 6%? And I'll be like, and I wrote an article about this a few months ago. Well, you can't look at the S&P as indicative of what your portfolio is or should be. That's 100% U.S. stock exposure. You're not that, right? You're not that aggressive. You're going to have some bond exposure. You're going to have some cash. You're going to have some, international stock exposure layered in. So the funds we use on the stock side are the market. Like, you're going to get the return. These funds will return whatever the market is, minus the little bit of fee, which is 0.05%, give or take. And that's not a fee to me, that's a fee to, the fund company managing it. So your returns on the funds will track those. Your returns as a portfolio are just simply then a function of how much of each of those funds do you have, or how much stock versus bond funds do you have. So I don't provide benchmarking, not because, again, I'm not trying to hide anything, far from it. It's just like, your returns are what they are for the market. Now, maybe you may think I'm lazy because of it, because I'm not taking conviction in saying, I think I can do better than the S&P 500, so let me pin my value on trying to outperform that. I'm not doing that. I'm saying I will get you the returns of the market in whatever combination of mix of bonds versus stock we have, et cetera. So I don't see the point in benchmarking. Now, with that said, I do have, for my business, performance reporting software, because some clients have asked to see what is my actual, what percent did my account return. I have software that they have access to that you can do that. And it does allow for comparing the returns of your portfolio versus a handful of benchmarks. S&P 500's there, international's there, bonds are there. So people can do it for information's sake, but I don't want, going back to, I think people focus too much on investments. I think this is one area where people get too hung up on the S&P did really well. Why am I not doing as well? It's like, well, you shouldn't. You're invested differently for a reason. So I don't want people falsely focusing on benchmarking and getting let down almost because the S&P was up so much and their portfolio wasn't. Your portfolio shouldn't do that well. If it does, I'm not doing my job right, frankly, if your returns were that high. So,
great. Well, thank you for adding some color beyond just no.
I was almost going to stop at no, and I'm curious what people's reactions have been. But
yeah. No, I love it. I would have been okay with it. So, but I also know I knew your answer to that anyway. So, all right, and your thought process behind it. So, because I think we're very like-minded there. All right. What's your view and usage of annuities?
They are a tool like any other tool. They have their place where they make sense. There are some scenarios and cases where an annuity is the exact perfect solution. There are other cases where it is far from the best solution. It's important to me to be quote unquote fee only. And you mentioned this term before, but just to clarify for people, fee only doesn't mean it's like hourly or just like you pay me a fixed fee. People that charge percent of assets could be fee only. Fee only simply means you don't sell anything for commission, nor are you in a position where you can get like some kickback from like a mutual fund that has an expense ratio. You can't get a kickback from the fund company in sharing in that expense ratio. That's fee only. I have a hard line stance on that. A lot of people don't agree with it, but my view is I think it's important that there's a delineation between the advice giver and the consummation of the product sale. I don't want to get too off on a tangent about that, but that's my importance and philosophy, maybe to a detriment, but it is what it is. So with that said, I realize though, like I can't sell insurance. I don't have insurance licenses. That's intentional. I can't sell annuities for the same reason, but I 100% realize annuities are needed. They're important. They are the perfect solution in many cases. So what I do is I work with outside insurance professionals who I like and trust and know they're thorough and they know products well and they're not just going to sell some steaming pile of garbage to someone. I will work with the client to do the analysis, come up with like the general guidance, like, hey, I think an annuity would fit you well here. If they're on board with that idea, and I'll explain the pros and cons, then I loop in. I have a couple of folks I work with who will then, insurance folks who will then be the ones to pick through specific products, like actual insurance carriers and specific annuities, and which ones have the best payouts and features and whatever. And I'll be the independent party who helps be kind of the third wheel there between client and insurance person to make sure, like, yeah, everyone's client's fully informed what they're getting. Insurance person isn't trying to sell them some steamy pile of garbage. The people I work with, I'm not worried about that. But anyway, so I'm still involved in the process is my point. So to answer your question, I'm not like many fee-only advisors who are wrongly flat out opposed to annuities on whatever their grounds are. I'm not like others who think annuities are the solutions to all problems. I like to think I'm practical and rational and pragmatic in realizing it's a product, it's a tool. When it makes sense, it does. When it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, completely agree with you on all that. So thank you for sharing.
Nice. Well said.
That's that's all right. Yeah. That's all right. All right. So what's your views around the usage of trust? And I think this question is meant to be not necessarily like a special needs trust for, a complicated situation or family dynamics you're trying to work at, but just a simple, like, revocable living trust.
I'm still trying to figure this out, honestly. I get conflicting information. I'm neither for them nor against them. Like annuities, sort of, they're a tool. Now, I have a good friend who's an estate planning attorney here nearby. I think I've mentioned this before. He's in New Jersey. He also licensed in New York. He said, absolutely not. The vast majority of people don't need a living trust. It's especially in New Jersey. Now, different states could be a different story, but he's like, in New Jersey, probate process is relatively easy, relatively quick, relatively inexpensive. So he doesn't push trust on people. He can sell, create trust, but he doesn't think most people need them. Victor, who was on recently, is also an estate planning attorney. Exact opposite, is of the opinion that everyone should have a living revocable trust. Just because, like, there's really no downside in his view. There's only potential upside to it. So I'm conflicted, man. I don't know. I think there's some clear-cut examples where if someone wants privacy of their estate administration. So, for example, if you own your house in a trust and you die, and that trust passes on to your heirs because of the trust, that house passes on to your heirs, that's not public record. No one except the lawyer involved, you who died, and your kid who gets the house will know that. If you don't have a trust and you just own your house outright in your own name and you die, your house passes to your heirs through probate. Probate is public record. People can go find out that you died. They can find out that you own this house, that it now passed to Joe Smith or whoever. So if you care about that privacy thing, you don't want it to be known, yes, get a trust. Most people, I don't think, care, in which case, that takes away one of those black and white reasons to get a trust. There's also, like, it could make the estate administration simply easier, for lack of a better word. So if that's important to you, fine. If you already have a pretty clean estate where there's not a lot that's going to go through probate, you may not care. Yeah. So not a great answer, but I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what my formal stance is on trust. I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, I think the only downside I can think of, to Victor's comment is the cost. And choosing that expensive, depending on the attorney you're using and the state you live in and everything else. Yeah, and then updating it periodically. But yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. What's your approach toward incorporating long-term care insurance into clients' plans?
Similar to annuities. Again, it's a product. It has a purpose. There's times where I think it makes sense, times where it's unnecessary. I struggle with this one, though, and clients do as well, because traditional long-term care insurance is just getting so expensive. Now, if you ever need it, you'll be glad you had it, regardless how much you paid for it. Like, all insurance is like that, right? In hindsight, you wish you had more of it when you actually need it. But like, I have a few clients. I have one client who comes to mind. He has a policy he's owned for 20 years, single guy. The premium's gone up a few times, and it's traditional long-term care. Premium's already gone up a few times in the 4 years I've been working with him. He got a notice 6 months ago or thereabouts that said, your premiums will be going up 200% from what they are now going forward. Not doubling, like tripling, going up by 200%. which is like, man, and the policy is already not cheap. It's like, I don't know, $3,500 a year or something, I want to say, in premiums. And now he lives in a state where they cap it to a 15% maximum increase per year. So it's going to be multiple years. He's getting 15% increases until he's paying like $10,000 a year. Now, again, if he needs it and ends up paying out $400,000 or whatever, like, yeah, it worked out well. But so I don't want to say it's a gamble, but that's a tough gamble for people to buy into, especially knowing premiums are likely to continue going up. So I'm not opposed to it, but most people I work with, and I think you're in a similar boat, have a few $1 million of assets, if not more, and that's partly a function of the flat fee thing. Again, we're not trying to be cheap; we're trying to just be fairly priced. And for people a few $1 million, we're a slamming deal. They can objectively self-fund pretty safely. So, traditional long-term care is not really a consideration for them. People with notice with less than $1 million, which I think you and I don't have a lot of folks we work with like that. You probably can't afford it in that case. Like, probably can't afford spending $5,000 a year on this policy. If you do have a long-term care event where you're multiple years of $120,000 or more a year of expenses, you're probably gonna have to burn through your assets, and then Medicaid kicks in. It's the people in the middle, like $1 to $2-ish million, where I think it's much more of a serious consideration. So then I have the conversations, I run projections and simulations in my software to try to show the impact of what this might look like. What happens if you have it for 3 years? What happens if inflation's 5% per year on it, whatever? And say, I think it could make sense. And I have referred them to someone I like and trust who deals in long-term care. They have the conversation with them, with that person. And then the decision's there. Decision's the clients. I don't push it on them. I say, I think it could make sense. Go talk with this person about your options. Some people have bought policies, some haven't. So I guess that's probably the best way to summarize my view and approach towards using long-term care.
Yeah, and the only thing I might add to that is, you referenced $1 million or more. I would add that potentially clients with less than that may have a pension that could otherwise afford the actual premiums, but not the actual care. And especially if it's a couple and you're trying to protect the assets for the surviving or for the other spouse. So,
right. Great points. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. What's your approach to putting in place a distribution plan for clients?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. So this ties into the next question, which I'll jump ahead. What's my deliverable, if any, around a client's distribution plan? So these two questions kind of related. I don't give people a printout of like, here's the next 20 years of anticipated distributions, like showing this year we're taking 50 grand from your IRA, 20 grand from your brokerage account. Next year we're taking 40 grand from your IRA. Like, I can do that, but it's wrong. It will change. We know it's going to be different. Yeah. So again, me reluctant to put too much like quantifiable, mapped out information in front of people, especially going out further in a year. I don't do that. The process as a whole is we have sort of long-term objectives, which is a combination of like just discussion and using software to help figure out planning opportunities. For example, if someone has $3 million in a pre-tax IRA, that's going to be pretty sizable taxable distributions at some point. So the opportunity is, let's try to get ahead of that. So if we know they're retiring this year, they're not going to, they're only going to be 60. They're not starting Social Security or pension yet. There's a lot of room in your tax brackets to take money out of the pre-tax IRA now while your tax bracket's really low. Fill it up. That's tax efficient use of getting ahead of that IRA money. So that stuff like that, that'll be the opportunity. But I won't set out now, here's exactly what we're doing for each of the next 10 years, because we don't know. Or if the person goes back to work in 2 years, which has happened with clients of mine. So we discuss in broad strokes the kind of overarching broad opportunities long term. Year to year is where the rubber hits the road, wherever the saying is, where we do map out, okay, what exactly are we trying to do? Maybe we're trying to keep your gross income to $206,000 to keep you below the level where Medicare surcharges start. And then I'll back into a plan. Okay, we can take out, you're going to have whatever. Let's say you're going to have $30,000 of pension. We got that. You're going to have $10,000 of interest. You're going to have X amount of capital gains. Let's back into how much money you can take out from your IRA at this point to fill up that $206,000 of gross income. So I do formal like tax projections for people, tax return projections. I have commercial tax prep software where I'll do a projection here. Here's what we anticipate your 2024 tax return is going to look like, showing the distributions we're planning for, showing the interest we're planning for, whatever. So year to year, it is very specific and hands-on, but every year's plan is going to be slightly different depending what we're solving for. Are we trying to keep income low because you're on Affordable Care Act? You want to maximize credits. Are we trying to fill up the 24% tax bracket to get ahead of your really large IRA? Are we trying to stay below a Medicare surcharge income limit? So everyone's situation is different. Year to year is very specific. Beyond that, I'm reluctant to put in front of people here's your distribution plan. It's almost like, I hate saying it, it's almost like every year we're going to figure it out. Trust me. Like that's kind of I don't say those words, but that's kind of it. Like I do say every year will be different. We'll map it out year to year, but I don't actually say the trust me part. That sounds greasy. But that is in effect kind of the approach to how we do the distribution planning.
Yeah, I love that answer because I think we talked about it before. I actually model it out some for clients just so they can visualize it. It's a lot of work to do that. And it's a lot of work to update it literally every year because every year it changes and clients don't retire when they think they're going to retire and they push it off a year or two or whatever else happens, or there's some other inheritance that comes in. There's so many other factors. And so when I used to offer kind of one-time project-based financial plans, which I know you used to offer too, probably when you first started your firm, I had clients ask, well, can you model this out for the next 20 years? I'm like, well, no, because it's gonna like next year is probably going to be wrong, like much less, 15 or 20 years from now. So I understand where people would like to actually have kind of the, not maybe the comfort level in seeing it, but also being able to understand everything. But it really is, in my opinion, a year-to-year decision, and that's why it's so important to revisit this stuff on at least an annual basis.
Yeah. Now, what I do provide is clients have access to financial planning software, which has a client portal, and it pulls in all their financial assets, not just the stuff that I manage, but their bank accounts, their 401ks, or whatever. And so there's a whole host of reports. Now, some clients I can see are in this thing daily and look at their information, routinely. Yeah. Others, their passwords expire because they didn't log in the last 6 months. Yeah. But they do have a lot of information available. If nothing else, like a live net worth snapshot every day. There is a basic cash flow projection that goes out until age 95 or 100 or whatever we assume they live to. Again, that will be wrong, but it's at least some projection they could look at. There's all sorts of investment reports that slice and dice their holdings. So it's not like I give clients nothing but a projected tax return every year. They have access to lots of stuff. I just don't want to do, not because I'm lazy, but because it's going to be wrong. So what's the point? This detailed, here's where all your money's coming from every year for the next 10 years, 20 years. So,
yeah, great point. I think that kind of coincides well with our next question, which is what's your deliverable, if any, around a client's distribution plan?
Yeah, specifically around the distribution plan, there's not, other than each year, there's that year's tax return projection accounting for the different distributions and other sources of income. Bigger picture, they do have access to this software that has their year-to-year cash flow report. But again, we know that's wrong because the default logic in these financial planning softwares is that any year you need more income than you're getting from Social Security or pensions or annuities, you're assumed to first burn through all of your cash. If and when that's depleted, you then burn through your regular brokerage assets. If and when that's depleted, then you're pulling solely from your pre-tax money. If and when that's depleted, then you're pulling from your Roth money. So the cash flow reports just show that. So I know that's wrong. Every year, we're consciously tweaking and massaging which accounts we're pulling money from and why, depending what we're solving for with the income and tax plan. So there is and there isn't a deliverable. I mean, the actual deliverable is a tax return projection, I guess. But the ongoing, 24/7 access to these other reports, especially the ones that do projections, we know they're wrong. Clients nonetheless have access to those, at leisure.
Right. So what are some tax planning opportunities you commonly come across with clients outside of Roth conversions? I know that's the big one in the elephant in the room that everyone's asking about, but.
What's tax planning? Never heard of that term.
No. You have a shirt, don't you? Don't you have the TERP shirt?
Oh yeah, that's old.
You still have that?
I do. Yeah, I sort of retired using that thing. But for those who wonder what this is, some point in 2020, I think it was, I went on record as having created the acronym TERP, T-E-R-P, Tax Efficient Retirement Planning. I had shirts made up. I gave them away to people in the Facebook group. I used to wear one myself, and I don't know. I just lost interest in that initiative. But so yeah. Anyway, no, that was a joke. So I am aware what tax planning is, and I won't mention Roth conversions. That's been beaten to death by everyone who's been on this show. But some other things, probably not surprising to anyone. It's sort of typical things that someone who truly focuses on retirement tax planning should be doing. So, my responses here aren't different than what other proper retirement tax planners are like people who are on Affordable Care Act insurance, like I said. There's potentially really juicy tax credits you can get if your income is below certain levels. So managing and massaging your income when you're on Affordable Care Act is I do that with a handful of clients. IRMA, Medicare surcharges, managing. Now, this isn't technically tax planning because the Medicare surcharges aren't a tax in the technical sense of tax, but functionally they're a tax because it's something you have to pay more of if your income is over a certain level. So I view that as a tax. So helping clients manage income to stay below certain thresholds for Medicare surcharge purposes. Tax loss, tax gain harvesting, tax loss harvesting. I think everyone's somewhat well aware of when you consciously sell something at a loss in a regular brokerage account to realize that loss. Maybe it's to help reduce other gains you already have, or just to reduce your other income because you can use up to $3,000 in net loss per year to reduce other income. Tax gain harvesting, not as many people are aware of. I do have some clients who happen to have some really low income years. There is actually a 0% federal tax bracket for capital gains, long-term capital gains. I'm in the process of making a video about that. I'm dragging my feet and getting it done, but I have had some clients where we've done that, where you can basically sell something at a gain, pay no tax on it, immediately turn around and rebuy that same thing. So now there's less gain going forward for when you eventually sell it in the future. I've done that before. Can't read my writing here. Hold on. I don't know what this says. Sorry, I have one other point, but I can't read it. So it must not be that important. Hopefully.
Yeah, well, and so I think to further that point that you just made, because very few people truly understand the tax gain harvesting, there is no rule where you have to wait a certain number of days, like if you harvest a loss, before you buy substantial equivalent security. So you could be out of the market for like 2 minutes, right? Feasibly,
right, yeah,
you could
exactly.
literally execute it, take the gain, and rebuy it. So you really have, no investment risk, because the IRS is not, the IRS, they want you to take income now, right? They're not going to try to penalize you for that. So that's their whole logic behind that rule.
I just figured out my other point and I wrote down here. I have horrendous writing. This one isn't super glamorous, but like state income tax considerations, which are often an afterthought for many advisors who don't really focus in taxes. Things like interest that you get from cash equivalents. So you don't pay state income tax, regardless what state you're in, on interest you get from U.S. Treasury securities, like Treasury bills, notes, or bonds. And so this past couple of years, as like we talked about before, interest rates were 5+% on Treasury bills. That's really good when like CDs or other money market mutual funds were paying 4% or even 5%. When you can get the same or higher rate of interest on Treasury bills, not only is that better just there, but the Treasury bill interest is not taxable at the state level. So if you have, let's say, 5% state income tax, like there's additional savings in that make the Treasury bill interest that much more appealing compared to bank account interest, like savings accounts or CDs or whatever. So something like that's been a little more front and center as Treasury bills and interest rates have been that much more juicy recently. So paying close consideration to state tax implications as well.
Yeah, that warms my heart, Andy. That's something very near and dear to me, especially in the last year as interest rates have risen, or the last 2 years, I guess.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly how few people actually understand that too, and they're just chasing yield as opposed to net after tax, highest net after tax yield.
It's not what you get, it's what you keep that matters, right? Or whatever that saying is. So taxes matter. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'll add to that too, just because it's something that's happened very recently here, for one of my clients, is they're actually thinking about leaving a state that does not tax retirement income. And so that might actually be a great opportunity. Let's say you're like leaving Texas or something like Florida, which, to go to California, which would be easy. That may be a great time to actually consider Roth conversions, because you want to put in, think through what's your current federal tax bracket, but compared to your future potential federal tax bracket plus the state tax bracket. And even if you're in a relatively high tax bracket now, it might actually be cheaper for you to pay taxes now, pay no state income taxes on it before you actually move. So
flip side, I had a client, lived in California, knew he was retiring to Texas, wanted to do a big Roth conversion. I'm like, nope, we're not we're waiting till the end of the year.
Yes,
because you'll save yourself whatever it was, 8% or 7%, state income tax on this. And sure enough, that's what we did. We waited and it mattered.
No, it's huge. Yeah. I love that. Again, very few people I think are actually looking at that, but I think it can make a big difference, monetarily if you actually do pay attention.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
All right. How do you balance trying to optimize clients' plans without getting unnecessarily complicated and focusing too much on small things?
I think like we've already discussed, I reluctant almost to the point I refuse to put in front of people really detailed long-term projections. Some people want to see that, but I try to make it clear it's not going to help. Again, I'm not hiding anything. It's just this will be wrong. I almost don't want you to see it because you're going to mentally anchor to it if you do see it, and you're going to bias yourself in thinking this is what's going to happen. So it's a hard balance. I think easier said than done, and I can't quite explain it well. I'm going to stumble through this, but you have to know your stuff as an advisor. You need to know the technical aspects. You need to have defensible answers behind everything you're doing, behind the investments you're picking, behind the tax strategies you're recommending. You have to know your stuff. Most clients, they don't care, nor do they want to hear all that detail. They just want to know, am I going to be okay? Or what makes sense for me to do this year tax-wise? So give them as much as they need to know without the superfluous fluff behind it. If and when they ask for the other details, you better very well know how to explain it and defend your position well. I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess I'm trying to say I'm aware how these reports and projections work. I know what they're doing. I know the logic in it. I know they're just making educated guesses about the future. I know they're going to be wrong. So I don't want people too hung up on that stuff. I explain, this is why I think this will be beneficial. I don't know if it was you or maybe it was David Aransky who was on, get the directionality right of the decisions you're making. The accuracy may not be there, but the directionality needs to be right. I very much subscribe to that. So get the big boulders done correctly, get the directionality right, but make it clear. I can't promise or guarantee this is going to pan out exactly as expected. I can't promise or guarantee you're going to realize this much dollar amount of benefit from it. So I don't want people to get lost in seeing all those long-term projections, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I can't remember if it was me or David, but I do have that same philosophy, definitely being, and I know I've said that a number of times to even clients, making sure we're headed in the right direction. It's much easier to tweak stuff, right, than it is to, I can't remember there's some phrase where it's you're better being roughly right than exactly wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. I'm sure that's not exactly right, but close enough.
And this concept ties back to what I said before was the right fit of client, someone who's not looking for perfection and precision to the nth degree in their plan, because I know I can't provide that. No one can. I'm at least honest to say it. And so I try to get that clear to people. So they know who they're working with and what my view is. So hopefully the people who end up being clients don't feel like they're getting misled by me not giving them these uber detailed 50-year projections. So I try to get ahead of addressing this balancing unnecessarily complicated type thing with optimization. But it's hard. It's a never-ending sort of exercise to try to walk this line.
Absolutely, and I think it really depends on who you're working with too, and who's on the other side of the table, right? So,
yeah.
All right. How do you help determine if clients have quote unquote enough for their retirements?
It's a mosaic, sort of hodgepodge. Probably isn't the most professional word to use, but triangulate or quadrangulate. I don't know. A few different things. Like I said, there's no bulletproof 100% way to know this plan is rock solid, has zero opportunity to potentially not work out as expected. So I sort of approach things from a few different ways, and if all these ways jive and all say yes, according to this particular way of viewing it, this looks like it's good, then that's what we go for. So it'll be a combination of like super back of the envelope things like quote unquote the 4% rule, and I hate calling it a rule because it's not, but it's a really good back of the envelope litmus test. Just loosely speaking, I've talked about this ad nauseum before, but if you have $1 million entering retirement and you expect your retirement to be a typical 30-ish years, history, and your portfolio is roughly 50-50 stocks to bonds, give or take a little, history has shown that there's no technically it's 33-year period, where if you take out 4% in the first year, so it'll be 40 grand in this scenario, and increase that every year with inflation, there's no historical 33-year period where you would have depleted your assets. So that's a fairly conservative starting point. So someone's got to, let's put some more numbers. You got $1 million, and the person says, I want to take out 100 grand a year for my portfolio, and I'm only 65. I'm going to be like, that's probably not doable. That's a 10% withdrawal. That's far away from this 4% number that's sort of kicked around as the conservative standard. Yeah. So that's one litmus test. Another is Monte Carlo. I know a lot of people poo-poo that because it's just like statistical educated guessing, but in the absence of a working crystal ball, I think this is kind of as good as you can get for trying to reasonably project the future of market returns and stuff like that. So I use that, but it's not a one and done thing. I've also talked about this ad nauseum. Monte Carlo is a living, breathing thing. You should always kind of re-update it throughout the years and use it as a moving target. If you start off with a really high score, next year it's down a little, okay. Next year it's down a little more, okay. If it keeps trending down, like you got to change something. Spend less, basically, right? Or get other sources of income. So if their Monte Carlo looks to be okay, and by okay, anything over 90% is amazing. People should not shoot for 100. 100 means you are not living enough life for the assets you have. Anything over 90 is great. Anything over 80 is good and plenty passable. 70 to 80 is like, in my opinion, like, this is doable, but realize you may need to make some changes. Below 70 is like, you probably shouldn't assume this is going to work. It might, but let's not use it as our base case. And then also sometimes just like very, very back of the envelope for some clients that clearly have enough, like they have a few $1 million and spend only $50,000 a year, not a few million, but like $5 million, let's say, and spend 50 grand a year. I'm like, that's 1%. Like I do have some people that are in a position like that and are concerned, do they have enough? I'm like, okay, let's think about this. Just step back. You're taking out 1% of your portfolio a year. That's less than the amount of dividends you're getting, less than the amount of interest you're getting. Like you're not even touching principal. So you're fine. Like I don't need any fancy software to tell me you're fine. You're fine. But coming back to like no plan's bulletproof, what if for whatever reason did they get taken by some, young swindler who enamors them and milks them for money, and they start taking out 500 grand a year because they're spending money on buying fancy stuff for this new, boyfriend or girlfriend. So no plan's bulletproof, but like objectively speaking, you're taking out 50 grand a year from $5 million, like you're fine. So stuff like that. Also, another thing to consider, home equity. Like a lot of people have a lot of money tied up in home equity that Monte Carlo does not capture, that traditional financial analysis doesn't capture. You got a better part of $1 million of equity in your house. Like you can use that, whether you unlock it by downsizing at some point and buying a cheaper house and then just unlocking a few $100 grand that way, potentially tapping a reverse mortgage, which I don't sell, but again, it's a tool that I'm open to considering. Yep. So factoring in home equity, and not that you should use that as your primary source of funds, but it's there nonetheless. A lot of people are a lot better off than they realize. One other thing I do, while I'm not 100% on board with like everyone should have annuities, I very much do value guaranteed income and making the most of Social Security, which is the best annuity you can get. That's very much in the DNA of what I do. People have pensions, traditional pension, same thing, like maximizing that, not just for them, but their significant other if they have a spouse. So getting as much guaranteed income as possible. I guess that's about it. It's a sloppy answer, but that's how I sort of figure out if people have enough.
Yeah, I love that, especially the home equity one. I think that's one that's very much overlooked. It's because it's not easily accessible within the planning software, right? So I think that's really nice for people, especially that are a little bit, let's call it someone who's quote unquote California rich, right? You bought a house for $300,000, now it's worth $2.5 million, 20 or 30 years later. if you're right on the border on a Monte Carlo simulation, that could be a huge asset to you.
Oh yeah.
10 or 15 years from now or 20 years from now, if we get, poor stock market returns. So I think at least having the wherewithal to actually include that to some degree. Now, how you include it would be debatable, but I think having that in there can be really beneficial to say, hey, you're right on the edge, but if we count in this extra $2 million of home equity, that's a huge benefit. I mean, a huge potential resource for you if we need to tap into it.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right. So for
I talk a lot. I mean, I'm just realizing how long we're running here. Good thing we're getting towards the end.
I think you and I were almost 2 hours on the last episode, so we're coming close to this one too. So I apologize. It's probably my fault too.
I can run on, but anyway.
Yeah. No. If anyone cannot tell, I love having conversations with Andy. So this is a ton of fun for me, and that's probably why we're going longer. But all right, for clients that do have enough, how do you help them get over the common emotional hurdle of not wanting to spend their nest eggs?
This is hard. Some people never will, just because that's so ingrained in their psyche. But I try as best as I can to use, like what we just talked about in the one above, a combination of different back of the envelope tools, Monte Carlo tools, whatever I can produce from my financial planning software to help give like some quantitative backing to the thought that they're okay. In some cases, like again, that client talked about where they got a few $1 million and only need to take out $50,000 a year. It's like, look, you're taking out 1 or 2%, whatever it is. I don't remember. I can't see any scenario where I can, again, unless someone starts just like milking you for a few $100,000 a year, I don't see how you're ever going to burn through this money. So in some cases, it's a little easier to just objectively be like, you're fine. Now, again, there's only so much you can tell someone they're fine. They might just refuse to believe it because that's how they were raised or whatever. But I find that some people entering retirement, clearly they're nervous about this, even if, again, you show them like, look, you're fine. First year or two of retirement, they're a little, until they get their legs under them, getting comfortable actually spending from their nest egg, as opposed to just like the last 40 years, they just added to it. Now they're taking from it. I find that most people after a first year or two of retirement, they get comfortable with it. Now it helps a lot if the stock market and bond market's been good in those first 2 years. But I think most people eventually come around to realizing, you know what, I was okay. Assuming they were okay from the get-go, they do eventually realize it. But some people never will get comfortable with it, and I don't have a good answer for how to further try to help them in that regard. Yeah,
it's hard. I think we even talked about this a couple of episodes ago, but even having like a therapist, right, or a psychologist, someone like that, just for them to talk to go through it. So
yeah,
it'd be helpful. All right, for clients that don't appear to have enough, how do you help them modify, adapt, and manage?
I don't have great answers other than the obvious. You either need more income or you need less expenses. I mean, it all sort of boils down to some combination of that. So you could work longer, not just necessarily the job you're in that you hate, but transition into some part-time work or, reduce hours if your employer allows it or something. Even if it's working at a retail place, just to get out of the house and get some money, even $20,000 a year, could potentially make a big difference in a plan. Spend less, obviously. Now, easier said than done. I think being willing to adapt is probably the best approach and answer here, especially for people whose plans and projections aren't such a slam dunk. It's like, yeah, this could work, but those people in that 70 to 80% Monte Carlo thing, I think are decent candidates for this. Like, this could work, but you're at higher chance of needing to adapt along the way if you get dealt the unfortunate circumstances and market conditions and whatever. So if they're okay with that, and I think most people are, they realize you often spend more in the early years of retirement as you're young and healthy, doing fun stuff, traveling, whatever. And then discretionary spending kind of tails off some, may or may not be replaced by higher healthcare expenses down the road. But I think people are okay with the idea of adaptability if need to be. What you shouldn't do is get more aggressive with your investments to try to really goose up returns. It could work, or it can really shoot you in the face and make you worse off. So don't do that.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. All right. If you are still listening, thank you. We are to the final two questions here. Thank you for sticking with us. All right, Andy. So if you could give only one piece of advice or word of wisdom to listeners about retirement planning, what would it be? And this is really more directed toward consumers and not other advisors.
This is kind of cheating. It's really two things that I'm trying to wrap into one to say it was only one. But I already talked about this, but there is no 100% bulletproof plan. There never will be. Even a lot of folks who are really strong into insurance or solely insurance will say, just buy a lot of annuity income. It's guaranteed for life. Like, it can't run out. That's a way to ensure your plan works. And there's still risk to that. Like, what if, one extreme scenario, you use all your investable assets to buy annuities? Yes, that annuity income won't stop, but there's almost certainly not going to be inflation increases to it. So maybe your expenses end up outpacing the income you're getting. Or for whatever reason, you do have other big expenses, one-off expenses, that now exceed the annuity income you have, and you have no assets left because you spent it all on annuities. So I'm not saying it's to bash annuities. My point is, annuities don't make for a bulletproof retirement plan. They could definitely help in circumstances. But some people will sell them as like, this plan will be perfect for you. You can't run out of money. I'm like, well, you still sort of can. So there's no 100% bulletproof plan. You will have to adapt and be agile and flexible. With that said, you have to go into retirement and retirement planning knowing that no matter how good your plan looks, things will change. Maybe your plan, your outcome will get better. Maybe it'll get worse. Maybe it'll stay the same, just in different ways. But you have to realize things will need to change along the way. I'll stop there. I can keep rambling, but this is supposed to be a succinct answer.
Well, I think flexibility is key. So I think that's perfect. Well said. So
thank you.
All right. Well, last question here, Andy. Where can people go find out more about you and or your business?
So I meant to say this before when we started discussing my background and my business, but my business is not taking on new clients at this point. So this episode is not to pitch for clients. So there is a website, teninfinancial.com, which I'll link to, but please do not reach out if you're trying to be a prospective client, because we are not in a position at this point to take on new additional relationships. But the site's there. Outside of that, those of you listening probably already know this, but the retirementplanningeducation.com website is sort of my side thing. It's not directly associated with my advisory firm at all. It's just my sort of content outlet where I do this podcast, YouTube, Facebook group, and a whole bunch of other freebies. Go there if you want to find out more about retirement planning and get a whole kit and caboodle of really good, valuable, free stuff.
Great. Well, I would second that. You have a ton of good resources out there that you've put together and continue to put together out there. So thank you again for doing all that. Andy, you and I have not met in person before, but are you going to the XY Planning Network conference in Minneapolis this fall?
I am. I'm going to be a panelist on one of the panels.
Awesome. I will be there. I will not be a panelist, but I will be there. So I'm really looking forward to finally meeting face to face. It's been a 3-year virtual relationship that we've had. So really looking forward to that. So
that is, I feel like I know you extremely well, and you're one of my probably best acquaintances / I'd say friends in the industry, and we've never actually met. Just goes to show the power of Zoom and what virtual connections can do. It's not the same as meeting in person, and I'm glad we're eventually going to. But it's been wild that it's been that long already. Wow.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time and everything today. It's been absolutely a pleasure to be able to turn the tables and interview you today. And can't wait to meet you here in 2 months in person.
And don't be surprised if I ask you to guest host going forward. I think this went really well, and it would help take some of the load off my plate if you're interested. But yeah, Mike was not aware I was going to bring that up for everyone listening. So
no, I was not.
See how he responds.
This was a ton of fun. If you made it through my dad joke, I think on the last episode, my uncle actually said, your dad joke was not great, but everything else was good. So I can maybe work on delivery there. But this was a ton of fun, and thank you everyone for listening, and for Andy for letting me be a part of the show. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks everybody.